individuals who did not experience colonialism themselves. They represent what Marian Hirsch describes as the generation of post-memory, as they have absorbed a memory that doesn't belong to them, one they didn't directly experience but received through the testimonies of their ancestors. This post-memory generation, numbering approximately 350,000 people in Goa, although the exact count within the diasporic communities remains uncertain, bears the responsibility for disseminating a singular idea of Goa within the broader Indian context, claiming, I argue, for a kind of cultural sovereignty. It is in this realm that music and sound assume a critical role. Let's see how. The music scene in Goa is diverse, complex, and fragmented. I'm using the concept of scene from the perspective proposed by Will Straw as something local, translocal, and virtual that, and I quote, designates particular clusters of social and cultural activity without specifying the nature of the boundaries which circumscribe them. It invites us to map the territory in new ways while designating a geographically dispersed attachment to a particular kind of music at the same time, end of quote. In a somewhat oversimplified manner, we can observe a significant contrast in Goa between the practice of Hindustani music, representing the classical tradition of northern India, and Western classical music. While the former is predominantly spread and consumed within the Hindu community of Goa, the latter is predominantly practiced and embraced by the Catholic community. I use the term predominantly because Hindustani music education in Goa has also found its place with mainstream education, notably at Kala Academy. This escaping from the classical Gharana system prevalent in northern India has led to increasing interactions between these musical traditions, although it is not the norm. These two important traditions of classical music coexist alongside traditional music genres, which, as in the first case, also hold significant religious and, in this instance, social significance. As various researchers, including myself, have extensively documented, the prevalence of the caste system within the Catholic context in Goa has given rise to cultural hermeticism. This has manifested in the association of specific performative genres with particular castes, resulting in their interdiction to others. This interdiction often depends on the type of context that music is associated with, and also the konkani used for its performance. I emphasize konkani because within the vehicular discourse in Goa, Goan music, this yellow at the center, primarily encompasses compositions sung in konkani, like the Mando, the Dulpo, the Dekni, the Fugri, the Dalu, the Kantaran, the Fair, the Tagore, the Musor, among many others. However, in Goa, we have witnessed very interesting mobility processes mediated by music that result from the articulation of economic and political factors. I'm referring to the processes of folklorization, touristification, and festivalization, which in all cases imply a transfer of performance from a participatory matrix to a presentational performance model. And also in public discourses about different musical or performance genres, an ontological approach associated with caste or even religion prevails. In the contemporary context, the permeability between castes and religions in context of musical performance is evident. It is precisely in this new soundscape of conviviality and coexistence that I will focus on this presentation centered on the case of Mando and Fado. The case of Mando. Mando is a musical genre often regarded by local authors as a form of classical music, unique to Goa, distinct from various other musical genres. In oral tradition, Mando finds its roots among the upper castes of Goa, primarily attributed to its composers, who are predominantly Brahmins, originally from the villages of Lotulim, Kurturim, and Raya in the Salcete Taluka. Here we have a picture of Agapito de Miranda, 1931. He is one of the composers, not the most well-known, but now I hope so. And this is one page of his the manuscripts that he left with many compositions made by himself. And also some transcriptions. Yeah, for those who know how to read in Portuguese, he said that this is only mine, nobody can take this, nobody can touch it except Father. Father, can you read it, Naresh? Can you read it, Naresh? So, okay. The earliest, well, these documents are already transcribed and digitized. So, and they are public. You can access them because they are in our the archive of the University of Aveiro, but they're open and they are also in Central Library. So everybody can read and use and consult the manuscripts of Agapito de Miranda. It's 5,000 pages of Mende and book. So, sorry. Oh, well, and this is also a very interesting image of a house of these Brahmin families where music Mando used to be performed. We can see here a party, more than 100 people are there. And it's interesting to see also the mochilas at the door. Okay, this is Lutolim, the same village of Agapito Miranda. And here we can see a philharmonic band just in front, of course, performing Western music for the party, for the particular party of the house. So the composition of the Mando is polyphonic, sung in 2, 3, or 4 voices in an ABA form characteristic of the song structure. It is accompanied by Western instruments such as the guitar, violin, piano, or mandolin, and the gumot, a percussion instrument that in 2019 was considered and classified intangible heritage of the state of Goa. I forgot to put a picture of gumot, I'm very sorry. During my first fieldwork in Goa, carried out in 1987, the Mando was already residual in this domestic context, although some families were identified as having the best Mando practices, as in the case of the Veiga Coutinho family in Aragão, with whom I lived during my fieldwork in subsequent years. I can show you a little bit of an example of Veiga Coutinho's performing Mando. And here, at least 3 different voices performing Mando in polyphonic voice. The vocal component of Mando is composed in Konkani, which adds significant cultural value to it as a symbol of Goanity. Two key factors contribute to its symbolic significance. Firstly, konkani served as a means of conveying concealed messages hidden from colonial authorities. Since Mando is polyphonic and mimetic in nature, a significant difference from the prevailing monodic musical traditions in India, I'm sorry, it is of konkani carries a profound, its use of konkani carries a profound sense of resistance against the violence of colonization. As I have mentioned in previous works, it appears that Mando was designed to please the ears of the colonizers while carrying messages that could only be understood by their performers. It was precisely this role as guardian of konkani, a language that was disregarded during the 451 years of Portuguese colonization, that gave it a special role in the fight for the autonomy of the state of Goa, the second factor that gives it particular value as a defender of Goanity. When in 1967, the United Goan Party managed to carry out a referendum, historically known as opinion poll, seeking to stop the Maharashtra-Vadi Gomantak Party's desire to integrate Goa into the state of India, it needed to prove that Goa has its own language essential for recognition of the state statute. This need led to the mobilization of the civil society based on initiatives carried out mainly by the Catholic community in order to demonstrate the existence of the language. Thus, in 1965, the Club Nacional organized the first Mando Festival, which continues to this day without interruption, now organized by the Goa Cultural and Social Center. According to one of the organizers, the first edition, Fado Lúcio de Veiga Coutinho, o que se pretendia, there's a translation to English, o que se pretendia era sobretudo afirmar a identidade cultural goesa. Queria-se fazer alguma coisa pelo konkani, no doubt. A única maneira de Goa permanecer separada do resto. Os estados da Índia são feitos com base linguística e os hindus, a maior parte deles, queria impor-nos o Maratha como sendo a língua também de Goa. Portanto, a única maneira era fortalecer o konkani, mesmo para reparar todos os agravos feitos por nós, não só pela Igreja e pelos governos, mas por nós mesmos ao konkani. Uma maneira seria esta, através da música. Então seria, por exemplo, ao propagar o gosto e o amor pelo mandó, afirmávamos cada vez mais a nossa personalidade konkani, a konkani personality. Very interesting expression. Mando underwent significant changes through the process of festivalization, resulting in other changes with important social significance. The 56th edition of the Mando Festival has already been announced, and as is the tradition, will take place in December. Over the past 55 years, this festival was witnessed the participation of 1,300 presentations and the formation of 755 distinct groups. According to ongoing research led by Kelvin Monteiro, one of my doctoral students in Goa, an analysis of the Mando Festival souvenirs shows that during its 55 editions, the festival drew the participation of 111 Hindus from Goa, 47 Hindus from other Indian states, 68 non-Goa native Catholics, 3 Muslims, which is very interesting, and 1 Parsi from Bombay. This means that the Mando liberated itself from its Catholic roots and its presumed Brahmin origins. The process of festivalization and subsequent folklorization, taught the hands of the post-Mohammedan generation, played a pivotal role in fostering an environment of equality and coexistence among individuals from different social classes, castes, and faiths. I will revisit this argument later. For now, let's shift our focus to the second case, the Fado de Goa. When I first arrived in Goa in 1987, Fado was predominantly limited to urban settings where non-professional musicians would perform it during informal gatherings. Despite being broadcasted through Emissora de Goa, All India Radio Now, before 1961, and featuring Portuguese fadistas, Fado was often regarded as a melancholic genre that was overshadowed by other Portuguese musical styles like popular music and folklore. However, A significant change took place in 1998 with the establishment of the Vem Cantar contest by the Goan delegation of the Orient Foundation, which was founded in Goa in 1995. The primary goal of Vem Cantar, which celebrated 25 years last week, is to promote the Portuguese language among the younger generation in Goa. To participate in the contest, many young Goan singers initially sought guidance from their parents or grandparents, and later turned to sources like YouTube to select their repertoire of Portuguese music. Fado became a popular choice for these singers due to its status as the most significant Portuguese musical genre. Due to the heightened interest in Fado, the Orient Foundation delegation in Goa organized a workshop on the Portuguese guitar in 2004, led by the renowned guitarist Mestre António Cheinho. During his time in Goa, Cheinho has significantly influenced two of his students, Franz Schubert Cotta and Orlando Noronha, who have since formed their own instrumental Fado groups and who are now the sole resources for Fado accompaniment in Goa, offering important opportunities for live performances. Recognizing the importance of Fado in the Vem Cantar contest and after its designation as Intangible Heritage of Humanity in 2011, the Orient Foundation introduced a day exclusively dedicated to Fado from 2012 onwards. Additionally, the contest winner is granted the opportunity to record a Fado CD. This recognition and support have significantly strengthened the importance of Fado and attracted the attention of aspiring singers in Goa. I have here one example of Nadia Rebelo, who was the winner of the Fado contest in 2016. Meanwhile, the Bombay-based international chain of hotels branded as Taj Hotel Palaces Resort Safaris, which operates 4 hotels in Goa, decided to support Fado, especially the fadista Sonia Shirsat, who won the contest Vem Cantar in 2006, after which she has been dedicated to Fado both in Goa as abroad, including Portugal. Let's listen a little bit of Sonia. Sonia Shirsat is widely regarded by the Goan press as the ambassador of Goan music to the world and the best fadista in India all the time. In 2016, due to her extensive contribution to the music in Goa, and after several local awards, Sonia was awarded with the highest distinction in the field of performing arts in India. So she received the Ustad Bismillah Khan Yuva Puraskar by the Sangeet Natak Academy for, and I quote, her notable talent of the traditional music of Goa, which includes, besides Fado, other Konkani folk performances genres like Mando, Dulpod, and Dekni. With this text and this award, Fado was officially recognized as an Indian musical genre. And is now protected and disseminated by the non-political worldwide voluntary movement Speak Macau, a society for the promotion of Indian classical music and culture amongst youth. Consequently, Sonia Shirsat now performs throughout India, promoting Fado workshops and striving to preserve it as an Indian tradition under the name of Fado de Goa. She initiated the Fado in the City movement, which encompasses Fado workshops that attracts 37 students in 2016, 75 in 2017, and above 80 in both 2018 and 2019. Additionally, the movement includes short courses in various schools and range of other initiatives, particularly events featuring Fado performance. I must please note that there's no School of Fado in Portugal, but there's a School of Fado in Goa. Okay? On August 15, let's see Fado and Mando together. Now, I'm approaching the end. On August 15, 2019, the Indo-Portuguese Arts Center located in Panjim, the capital of the Indian state of Goa, inaugurated the first Casa de Fado e Mando in India. This establishment, named Madragoa, pays homage to a traditional neighborhood in Lisbon where Fado music was historically performed and where numerous Fado houses, restaurants or bars featuring Fado performance during dinner time can still found today. Sonia Shirsat is one of the resident fadistas at Madragoa. From September to April, Madragoa presents live Fado and Mando performance every Friday and Saturday. The show starts at 7 p.m. and it is divided into 2 sessions, each showcasing a different style of Fado music and Mando. During the break, the audience is invited to enjoy Indo-Portuguese petiscos, which are appetizers such as fried codfish, meat, croquettes, samosas, and the famous pastel de nata, accompanied by sangria. The objective of this event is to provide audience with an immersive experience of Portuguese landscape and soundscape, as it is common in the Portuguese Casas de Fado, where Sonia is at the moment also promoting a debut of her student, Shushti Prabhudesai. At the moment is today, since 1 week ago. Shushti is a Hindu fadista and also Hindustani singer. She is a very interesting case of what John Becking would call bimusicality. Here we can see Shushti 2 days ago in a house of Fado in Lisbon, just a very short clip. In Lisbon. And we can see 2 other students of Sonia at Madragoa performing Fado in a very interesting way, a way that we cannot see in Lisbon. So the scenario presented above is undeniable, controversial, and it could be interpreted as displaying elements of colonial revivalism. In fact, Both Fado and Mando are colonial music genres, and we may say that they are more alive in Goa now than in colonial times. As the Goan journalist Vivek Menezes argues, Goa is living one of the most vibrant musical moments of its history. But the music to which Menezes is referring to is the music performed, namely by the descendants of those that in the past pioneered the music in the stage in Goa, mainly Catholic. This minority was the one that was free to transfer their musical practices to other contexts and to transform the Goa's musical scene. While such a phenomenon might not be surprising if they're occurring in Brazil or Mozambique, the situation in Goa holds particular sensitivity due to its historical context. Despite having been liberated from Portuguese colonial rule after 451 years, Goa never attained complete independence. As a result, a considerable segment of the population, consisting of individuals from diverse religions, generational and social backgrounds, is deeply invested in safeguarding Goa's cultural sovereignty. In this sense, the revitalization of musical practices linked to the colonial past can be understood as both a political process and an aesthetic tool to the colonial representation in a postmodern context. Fado singers in Goa seize the opportunity presented by institutions and the tourism industry to embrace Fado, not as a nostalgic for the empire, but as individuals exercising their freedom to choose their own aesthetic mode of expression, similar to Fado enthusiasts worldwide. Taking advantage of the proximity to ancestral memories, they demonstrate that their position in the world is shaped not only by their Indianness, but by something else that can be added. Music, particularly Mando and Fado, emerges as a powerful tool in achieving this objective, also serving as a means of self-decolonization. Both experienced and revival in Goa during times of crisis and threats to political and consequently both experienced a revival in Goa during times of crisis and threats to political and consequently cultural autonomy. The first, when the dilution of Goa into the state of Maharashtra was imminent in 1967, I'm referring to Mando, and the second, when the policies of the BJP government sought to homogenize Goa and erase everything that could differentiate it from Hindu India. This way of claiming some autonomy through music is significant and demonstrates its power as a promoter of new forms of coexistence and conviviality by bringing together creeds, castes, and classes, but above all in defending of the type of possible sovereignty, in this case, Goan cultural sovereignty. So thank you. I had a new.
Thank you very much, Susana. We'll hold our questions to the end so that we can proceed with the time for the panel. Now I have the pleasure of presenting guitar virtuoso Micah Oelze, professor at Adelphi University. We're all anxiously awaiting the publication of the results of his project on composing the Brazilian mind. The fascinating attempt to look at composing in the 1930s after the classic period of modernism to show how the combination of elements from the compositions helped to promote an idea of Brazilianness. Today, right, we're going to hear you speak on, excuse me, yes, racial counterpoint. Colonial.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We're just gonna should get the PowerPoint going. Good question. This one right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I put this here. Next one.
This is not the one.
Try another different presentation. Yeah, sorry, maybe I pointed to the wrong one. What's it called?
So this is
Brazil.
backwards, I know.
Piece of the beam.
Look at this. The infinite world. Oh, man.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys so much for coming to the talk. And I especially want to thank the conference organizers for letting me jump into such an amazing conversation on soundscapes past and present. I spent the last decade looking at Brazil's nationalist composers, people who wrote music for symphony orchestras, especially in the 1920s and 30s. They were writing music that told stories about the nation that was Brazil, and they often did that without using any words at all, just sounds. For most of you, this won't come as a surprise. During the interwar years, Brazilians felt increasingly interested in weaving national yarns. It made sense to tell stories locally about Brazil as a single coherent nation, given that government officials were trying to centralize power and standardize political institutions. Likewise, there was value in telling these stories international, since merchants and politicians increasingly found themselves trying to explain Brazil to North American bankers and buyers. But there's an aspect of my own work on these composers that might catch you off guard. My research quickly turned a hard turn away from that of other musicologists when I began to track how this generation of composers, along with their teachers, their colleagues, their friends, became absolutely fascinated with psychology and psychoanalysis. It's hard to read a page of their correspondence or their music manuals without coming across phrases about the nation's collective psychology or about Brazil's primitive unconscious. Many in the cohort were on a mission to find special melodies and rhythms to instigate such projects as, let me give you a direct quote, a quote, education revolution that acts with depth, descending to the remote depths of the collective unconscious and loosening the pre-logical chains by which it is bound. This is because this was a musical project, because as a local music critic had it, another quote for you, quote, music stimulates through various processes an abrupt reaction in our organisms. It's a physical and physiological reaction added to by the fact that we stop breathing naturally, a consequence of our nervous tension and effort to focus to better understand the nuances of a multicolor orchestration or a simple melody, end quote. That comes from a program at a concert hall in 1935. In my broader work, I suggest that ultimately the composers weren't just overcome by a weird fascination. They subscribed to an entire theory of nationhood, original to Brazil, one that historians have not yet written about. They believed that the nation was less an imagined community or even a racial conglomerate, or rather a psychic unit, a group of people sharing a collective consciousness. Moreover, they believed that political and economic advancement would only be achieved with the help of collective psychic evolution. It was from this paradigm that composers end up venturing out on a series of intriguing experiments, most of them in the concert hall, but also some of them in public parks, radio broadcasts, and industrial factories. That's what my book is about, hopefully coming out next year. I want to explore one of these experiments with you today, just one that happened in the concert hall. The case study in question is a piano concerto written by this guy in 1931. In the next 15 minutes, I'd like to make just one argument and then explain why it matters and why it might matter for us today. The argument is this, that this piano concerto that I'll share with you guys gives us a glimpse of composers interested in what we could call psychomusical realism. I'll let you write it down in case you want to take notes. Like I say to my students every day, psychomusical realism, aka a sonic narrative that provided a believable moving portrait of the evolution of the nation's collective psyche. Imagine a zoetrope, those old pre-film motion picture devices that rotated in a circle while you watch through slits as a monkey turns into a human. Except this was a symphonic concert, and audience members listened as the Brazilian psyche underwent evolution from colonial past into industrial present. I argue that making sense of this evolutionary narrative might matter, and specifically matter for us at a conference on soundscapes, insofar as it actually suggests that composers were engaged in the same conversations as their political peers working with immigration quotas, education reform, and positive eugenics. In fact, the two quotes I just shared with you about music capable of subconscious work, activating the body's nervous system, come from scholars simultaneously engaged in music debates and in political conversations advocating for social hygiene, education reform, and explicitly the need for a dictatorship. I'm hoping to show that the composers who contributed to Brazil's 20th century soundscapes were hyper invested in nationalist political debates, even as they operated according to a separate metrics. Namely, they were rescoring the colonial past to transform how listeners felt about the present. Let's get started. The piano concerto in question was written in 1931 by Camargo Guarnieri. He would go on to become one of Brazil's most respected concert composers, but at the time was a young kid, a virtuoso who had just finished his piano training with Antonio Leal de Sá Pereira and a mentorship in aesthetics with the famous poet Mário de Andrade. You can already see the signs, the presence of psychology just by taking a look at the titles of the works that he was working with. Antonio Leal de Sá Pereira, right in the middle there, was in the process of thinking through his new method, which he eventually titled the psychotechnique of learning music. And Renato Almeida teaching him the history of music, Brazilian music, with all sorts of psychological ideas. And Mário de Andrade, here's one of his essays, Musical Therapy, which I think starts with the line, "Não devo insistir sobre os efeitos psíquicos e fisiológicos da música, mais que suficientemente provado pela experiência de cada pela tradição e pela ciência." There's no reason we should argue. Music is psychical and physiological. We get other ideas by looking at the titles of Mário de Andrade's works on music, or by looking at some of the other articles that were coming out and formed his cohort. J.P. Portocarreiro's Psychoanalysis of a Civilization, Roger Bastide's Psychoanalysis of Cafuné. José de Andrade that writes a piece on Camargo Guarnieri and calls it Music, the Key to Our National Psyche. We get the first clues of the storyline by looking at the names of the concerto's three movements, Selvagem, Saudosamente, Depressa, from savagery to speed, and of course, a long 19th century of saudade. Program notes from the premiere explained that the listeners would have the chance to hear Brazilian history from start to finish, from the savage atmosphere, these are quotes, of an energetic Amerindian theme at the onset, moving through the experience of a slow dang fever, and then eventually into the fast-paced industrial present. Was this actually a main musical narrative of the country's psychic evolution, or just its political history? You could ask me. Critics actually explicitly pointed to the psychological nature of the tune. De Estadão, de Estado de São Paulo, hailed Guarnieri's concerto as daring and, quote, firmly rooted in the soil of our musical nationalism. Mário de Andrade congratulated the composer on, quote, the Paulistan substrate that psychologically characterizes your work. Fellow music writer Renato Almeida agreed, saying that Guarnieri's compositions, quote, transcended popular themes and formal elements by highlighting psychological intensity. Guarnieri's work laid bare, quote, the characteristics of the Paulistan psyche, and per a separate concert program, Guarnieri was, well, both a poet and a psychologist. What exactly was happening in these movements, in these tunes? It's a 20-minute concerto, and I'm only going to talk to you for 10 more minutes. So I just want to zoom in on the first part on savagery, especially because that's the colonial experience, and that's what I'm interested in having us talk about here. So we'll zoom in to savagery. Check this out. Some of us read music, most of us don't. All you got to follow for me is, do the lines go up or down? And then follow. I'm also going to circle some things along the way, and you can follow along. And if you don't want to, close your eyes. Listen to this. You can tell that this is how this thing kicks off. Our friend Guarnieri has all four fingers on the piano, all playing one line. No harmonies yet. And what's going on? He's pulling concepts from his textbooks. I'm throwing these up as we go. I won't stop on all of them, but it gives you an idea. Mário de Andrade explains that indigenous melodies fall from high to low because why? Because Indians are tired. We need to reproduce that on the score. What else is going on? We have octaves because, as a different book from Andrade taught, it appears that the music was the principal distraction that Africans had in the exile in the Americas. They flooded Brazil with monotone chants. So we already have some of the things that we're talking about melodies versus harmonies, and some of the political colonial dynamics that get invested into this musical language or the musical grammar. Also point out that this starts out with a pentatonic melody and moves on with some chromatics there. Also things that have to do with reminding of what it means to be savage, not being able to use an equal temper tuning scale or diatonic or a 12-tone scale as well. There's all sorts of other things going on that you might pick up on. There's eventually going to be time signatures, crazy things, moving back and forth, a lot of things that are references to Stravinsky's notions of primitive, or Manuel de Falla in Spain, other things that are going on as we move forward. And then there's also things that Guarnieri is writing in the score. So he's actually going to write, play seco como percussão. He wants the piano player to act like a drummer, so that this actually appears. He did a rehearsal for this 6 months before actually writing the whole piece for orchestra, and he has this part where he talks about making it sound like this is a batuque, an African drum session, just by the piano itself. We're going to move forward here, and I want to show you the next moment. There's 3 moments. One was savagery. The second is I want to mention chord psychology to you guys. And here we go on. You can hear at the beginning that you're going to hear the same savage descending melody, but it's going to Guarnieri will write cedendo, being ceding in the sense of coming back or surrendering, and watch as it surrenders, as the savage melody is played out on the piano sweetly for the last time. Then we're going to see the very first time that chords come into the concerto. That's that last time you hear that primitive line. Strings out. Three voices. And a new melody. Not going on to break down, but let me give you a couple of visuals so it can help out here. If we would take the chords and we would just actually write them down or isolate them, I just took them out and played them on the piano. You're going to see that you go from one line in the strings, the F, then you have thirds. Now we have 2 voices. Suddenly we have 3 voices, and we have 4 voices after that. And what happens is that there's a series of quotes in the books that Guarnieri studies and in the magazines that he's reading that suggests that his mentors are thinking about a relationship between chords and psychological development, between chords and the ability to think about complex ideas. So the general evolution of the human spirit brings a harmonic evolution. Different writers talking about at what moment do chords arrive, and what does that say about the evolution of the psyche. Mario de Andrade is obsessed with this and writes letters back and forth on the concept that are still in the archives to Guarnieri's piano teacher, getting excited. He says, I have all sorts of different ideas, such as that Euro-Christian music is the first time that chords actually tell us feelings, and that chords can actually be read for meaning. What else is going on? If you would go back, you'd also see that on top of these chords, we have the entrance of a brand new melody. I suggest that this is the arrival of the Portuguese in this story. And what happens is that this is the line, the Portuguese, if you would actually, there's 2 voices there, you can split them apart. I put one on top and the other one on the bottom. And I gave you some quotes to let you know that among the new people, the popular motif came with the conquistador, reflecting the pain of adaptation which bled its audacious spirit. The idea that there are high expectations and ambitions of the Portuguese, but they are met by crashing failures. And so this is the idea of a rising melody followed by a crashing and a rising and a crashing, something that is also analogous to the experience of the Portuguese coming across on the Atlantic. And then below this, while that might be a conjecture, might sound like a conjecture on my part, What's less of a conjecture is that this is a very clearly on the bottom, a rhythm that if you had played on the guitar, you'd recognize it as a samba, popular samba. And it goes with the idea that, Andrade and others are saying that samba oozes the popular soul. It's the unconscious depth of the people with ecstasy and hilarity, full of emotions and charm. No wonder that Guarnieri would put this in the middle as a way of saying that these rhythms are hidden inside our psyche. Moment 3 here is the idea of interpenetration. At this point, the movement's 2 themes begin to mix, your savage beginning and the idea of Portuguese ambitions and their failures. We could say that they mix, or we could say that they transform each other, or we could say that they're cut up like an early silent film editor chopping up different films and putting them together. We get one hearing of the Portuguese with one hearing of the savage. Here you can see if you can catch it. That middle part, that's really nice, right? It gets kind of pretty a little bit in the middle there. What's going on is that these two moments, this is a moment where each part is like teeth in a gear. The savage idea and the Portuguese idea come together and they grate together one against the other. And in addition, each theme transforms the other into a new harmonic logic. The monophonic primitivist melody da 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 that we see on this bottom 2 measures here. This is now something that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different notes at once. Now what happens is your primitive voice now has harmony. It has emotional meaning and emotional intensity, whereas up the top you actually have adding of flat signs to make what was earlier ambition a little bit more dark. In 1928, Andrade had issued a call for composers. This is again Guarnieri's mentor in aesthetics. He had issued a call for composers to use, quote, racial systems to conceive of polyphony, racial systems to conceive of harmony. He actually started the conversation by talking about choro music, the tunes that you'll hear at our conference tomorrow night. So I want you to listen for me tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, you'll hear that when Thiago comes in and plays the bandolim, you'll hear that he's playing a melody. But then Rogério is going to be playing the 7-string guitar right next to him. And you're going to get confused because Rogério is also playing a melody. What's going on? What's going on is that Brazil has this magnificent genre called choro, which is one of the most complex in the world because you have 2 different people. And the second one, the 7-string player, is improvising counterpoint. It's very complex. So what's going on is that Andrade was asking what it would sound like if a composer brought this tradition to a concert hall, yet assigned each instrument a melody constructing according to his cohort's grammar of psychomusical realism. If I give the flute a theme that is a melody that is constructed according to the grammar of savagery, of Indianness, or of Africanness, pentatonic scale, descending melody because of tiredness. And then I actually give a piano the melody constructed with a Portuguese concept. And then I marry them, what happens? Guarnieri gives us the answer, showing how each racial group's rhythm or contour can transform the other. He physically interlocked the 2 themes and then transformed them harmonically. And by doing that, he creates a physical and temporal bond analogous to the sexual unions described in so many of the nationalist texts and music histories of his generation. The standard high school history text of the 1920s, for example, explained that the Portuguese, quote, colonists, far from civilization, adapted to savage life. They had their own customs barbarized. Such barbarization can be heard in that ostinato played below the 2nd theme in the development section. If Guarnieri indeed accepted Andrade's argument that harmonic complexity indicated mental development, then his decision to put this savage theme to outfit it with chords also shows that the Colonial project was successful in advancing the psychological development of Brazilian Indians. Now we're going to talk about the politics and the ethics of that in 1 second, but just pause for a second. It's healthy to be a bit skeptical of my assertion here that the development section, which is what we're hearing now, aimed to portray a musical miscegenation. Let me be my own critic in the room. This is because making a successful case for extra musical illusion is easiest when a composer bucks the norm, bucks the form of the genre. But the sonata form forefronts thematic development as a requirement. Mixing, overlapping, complicating the themes is an expected part of the tradition. Moreover, Guarnieri left little in the way of comments about the logic behind his piano concerto. So how can we be sure that Guarnieri is making an extra musical allusion? You have to look for a long time in the archives, be friends with the archivist, let you go upstairs to the uncatalogued portions of the works, read through all the programs of Guarnieri's later tunes, and eventually you'll find that in 1952, he does this same thing in his Symphony No. 3, but he's actually explicit about it in the concert program. This is what he says. The program's notes for the symphony say, the three themes are superimposed, amalgamated in sharp polyphonic work suggesting the formation of the Brazilian nationality atop its three original races, indigenous, black, and white. The program went so far as to explain that the racial interpenetration was the core idea, quote, on which the work was conceived, and that such counterpoint was what allowed the, quote, stream of emotion to flow from the piece. Guarnieri, in other words, was indeed pushing a Brazilian racial counterpoint, and he kept it up for decades. Yes, he developed his themes in a way consistent with the expectations of the genre, but he used the opportunity to explore the sonic significance of racial encounters. So let me leave you with the conclusions. And it's not that, I just, threw a quote up. Two scholars have made some cool forays into asking about the historic relationship between music and 19th century scientific inquiries. Ana Maria Ochoa Gautier, used to be from Colombia, in her book on orality, looked at 1880s Colombian travel literature, especially Alexander Humboldt going down the Rio Magdalena. And she recognized that the dude was listening to dialect shrieks and songs, denouncing them as barbaric, slurring distinctions between voice, race, and savagery. In other words, she noticed that here's a scientist racializing vocal tones. We see a similar observation in the work of University of Washington's Eric Ames, who has looked at certain early German music ethnographers transcribing the songs of colonized people. And come to find out, he and his fellow music scholars were laying out a sonic timeline of human evolution from savagery to civilization. And of course, musicians from colonized areas always get hit with the savage rap. The main thing I see in the work of those two scholars is that in these very years that archaeologists are busy doing carbon dating, music men were engaging in what we might call contour dating. Dating melodies by looking at their contours, their rhythms, and their scales. I'm here showing the flip side. Brazilian composers, come to find out, actually spent decades working through this kind of ethnographic material in their conservatory curriculums. They memorized all this stuff and wrote according to it. They operated in a method analogous to their colleagues in modernist CM architecture. People like Le Corbusier, who memorized a gambit of architectural moves and then applied them to building after building, city after city, as he went on his tours. These musicians learned the code of each race's psychomusical profile, how indigenous or African thought manifested itself on the 5 lines of the partitura, the score, and then they built accordingly. What does this stuff mean and why might it matter? Ames in his research suggests that early German musicologists were after these transcriptions because they felt that this was still a time in which the ear might have more purchase than the eye. I think he's onto something. Brazil's nationalist composers believed that by working on the ear, they might achieve more than by working on the eye. It's like contemporary experiences. Like imagine, I'm watching NFL football and a recruitment commercial comes on about a Marine reuniting with his family. I start crying because of the incredible cello soundtrack, only I don't realize it's because of the cello. I think it's because of the Marines. At that point, it doesn't matter what reservations I have against the US military-industrial complex. My emotions just got tapped. These composers came up in a tradition where their mentors knew that. And to paraphrase Spivak, sometimes nationalism isn't about loving your country, it's about feeling its comfort and familiarity. To close, the Brazilian composers here were doing some intense mathematical proofs that a Gilberto Freire would never be able to pull off. You can write 3 history textbooks to try and redeem colonial institutions like violence and rape, but you can't make it sound pleasant. But here in the score, we get sonic proof that the past can be harmonized. That's the power, the appeal, and the danger of psychomusical realism. If the melodic lines are constructed with surgical precision that comes from years of ethnographic transcriptions, they must be real, right? And if we harmonize those, then how can we deny the emotions that they produce as we continue ourselves with this conference? I wanted to conclude by suggesting that the soundscapes of the present, and especially those that make claims about the colonial past, are so powerful because of the way that they can be recovered, resounded, and subtly arranged. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have to be careful what we hear. I'm very happy now to introduce our participant who's traveled the farthest. And I wish I had met Gérald Estadieu when I was at University of St. Joseph in Macau. It's fascinating stories to tell. So today he's going to talk about his work as a professor at the University of St. Joseph in the area of architecture, art, and design, and particularly on AI and soundscapes, talking to us today about soundscapes in Macau. Gérald, welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, thank you for inviting me for this conference. I feel a bit like a UFO in the room. So I live in Macau for more than 20 years. I'm not an historian, I'm an engineer background, and I'm more in between art, digital technology, and science. So it's a very different approach to soundscape. And I'm here because we are working on a soundscape project that we call Soundscape.Ai. You will understand in a minute why. So I'll present something that is very different probably from what we've seen before. But I'm really glad to be here to listen to historian perspective on sound that can transfer my experience, my future experience on soundscape. So I'll talk quickly about Macau first to quickly cover it. So this is a drawing by George Shimmery, the British painting that spent his, the last part of his life in Macau and doing a lot of amazing painting at that time. Macau also is in the southeast China, 60 kilometers from Hong Kong. So it's been growing like that's really difficult to comprehend in the last 20 years or 40 years. It almost doubled the land surface of the city by reclaiming on the sea. The population is about 700,000 more or less. It's the highest population density in the world. It's also, unfortunately, one of the highest density of cars in the world or motorbike. So that's not something very pleasant. 90% of Chinese, 4% Filipinos, so usually helpers in the houses, 2% more or less of Portuguese and 1% of Macanese, which is going to be probably the most interesting part later on. So it's obviously been about 400 years of Portuguese governance, more than 400 years. And it's been since 1999 is a special administration region of the People's Republic of China. With its own government, so it's a little bit like Hong Kong. So the law is totally different. It's based on the Portuguese law. It's also one of the top GDP per capita in the world, which is mainly due to casino business, obviously. So I'm not the richest in the room. It's just the number I come mainly from casino. And so the major industry are casino and tourism nowadays, obviously. So if we look at Macau, there's different aspects. So there's obviously the Chinese tradition that is very present for centuries, obviously, whether it's temples or different type of folklore and so on. So those tradition and festivals, they remain very strongly and have been encouraged to attract tourism nowadays. There's also obviously a very deep Portuguese heritage, whether it's in architecture, obviously, like you can see here, but also in food. There's Portuguese food is very present, but also a mix of Chinese and Portuguese, and also from India. So there's the create Macanese food, basically. That is quite interesting. And then there's also religious, of course, heritage with a lot of churches, and it's about 7 to 8% of the population that is still Catholic in the place. Education, very important. More than 50% of the children are going to Catholic schools in Macau, so it's still very a strong evolution tradition in Macau. So the visual aspect and the cultural aspect and the tradition from Portuguese origin or from the colonies. So we'll see that like the language is also coming from Goa and so on. It's very strong. In terms of soundscape, we'll see that it's a bit different. But Macau is in kind of a transition since the late 90s and the handover. So you go across the city and you see very Chinese tradition. You see a lot of motorbike, and you'll see the numbers later. That's a bit crazy. So it's like a lot of cities. It's a city in transition, but also very rooted in the tradition, and that's something that is very different from Hong Kong, where the government never really cared too much about keeping the heritage buildings and so on. Macau, it's really one of the key for the Macau government. And then we have the modern city that came up since the 80s, more or less, starting to build high-rise building all over the place. And obviously we have the casino that comes from Portuguese heritage as well, because it started in the 50s. And this is the only place in China where you can gamble. So the majority of the gamblers are coming from China, obviously. So it's been building crazy. It's also the biggest place for gambling in the world. I mean, it's before pandemic, it was about 7 to 10 times the size of, the revenue of Las Vegas. So it was much bigger than Las Vegas in terms of money, but you can maybe recognize some buildings from Las Vegas as well, like the Venetian, and all of these have been brought to Macau. So this is actually really from a Portuguese heritage. So they don't bring sound from the casino. It's officially illegal to record sound in casino, although we did it. But, so that's just to put in context a little bit. I'm sure a lot of you have been to Macau before, but to give a quick context. Now I'll talk about the research project we've been working on. It's called AI-based multimodal qualitative mapping of Macau soundscapes. So where it's really, so it's funded by the FDCT, which is the equivalent of the FCT from Portugal, so the scientific fund. And our idea is really to use technology to try to identify sound in the city, and in a way that we can in the future be able to predict the evolution of the soundscape in part of the city, and then probably propose some evolution. So what is special about sound quickly? So of course there's the physics of the sound, so that's really the science behind the waveform, the speed, the sound pressure level, so the decibels of the sound, and many more parameters that we can identify. There's the typology and the listening. So in typology, we really have 3 types of sound: the voice, the music, and the environmental sound. And our focus here in this project is more for the environmental acoustic. There's the temporality, which make it very much complex as images, because the sound is in time. We cannot understand the sound just at a nanosecond. We need some time to be able to understand what the sound is about and how we react to the sound. So it's much more complex in terms of technology to process sound. And then not only that, but it's polyphonic. So there's never, if we record the sound in the city, there's never a sound that is alone. It's mixed with a lot of things. And then when we talk again about technology, then it becomes much more complex to be able to handle that. So that's where we are trying to focus. So what is a soundscape? Of course, I'm not going to teach you what is a soundscape. It's just in our context. So in the more scientific approach, that's how we approach it in this project. So it's based. One of the bases of course from Murray Schiffer, the Canadian musician, that defined more or less the concept of soundscape in the 70s. And it's also nowadays it's been 3 ISO technical specifications that have been created since 2014 to the last one 2019. So they're still evolving over time, but it's basically defining soundscape as an acoustic environment as perceived and or experienced by a person or people in context. So it's the human perspective, how we feel about sound. And it's very interesting because you can be in an environment where you have a lot of noise, and if you listen it with your headphones in the lab, you would say, well, that's very noisy. But when you are on site, due to the overall environment, then your experience of the sound could be totally different. And that's what it is about. And it becomes a multidisciplinary approach on the acoustic ecology with different aspects. So of course, the physical measurements of sound, but also social, human and social science applied to it. So that's the context of the soundscape where we are working on this project. And then the ISO, I mean, some research before the ISO technical specification started to see, okay, how can we classify sound, basically? And one of the easiest way to do is by defining what's the source of the sound. And so this classification is what has been more or less defined in the ISO technical specification, where we have mainly 4 branches. So we have human sound. It's not only the voice, it's the movement or whatever we are doing as human. The music, so it can be amplified or not, and the nature, so everything from animal to vegetal, and as well as everything that is mechanical, so that is created by human, basically, but indirectly. So that's the classification that have been approached, and then we can go in as many levels as we want in details to try to identify the source. And so for us, it's extremely complex to be able to identify those sound. It takes a lot of time. And so there's some data set that are available around the world to try to classify them. But the objective of the initial objective of the project was to analyze environmental sound and noise pollution over time. So it's to be able to record almost constantly sound and to be able to see how it evolved over time. And from that, develop tools that could make recommendations either for policy making or for urbanism, professional like architect or urbanist. And then we have a third aspect of this project, which is more public awareness programs with creative workshop and installation arts that I will mention also later on. So this is the team of the project. We've been with different researchers, different places around the world. So we developed a kind of workflow that goes for, the first step for us was to record sound. And to record sound, so we have to put recorders in the city or over the places, get hundreds of hours of recordings, and then start to analyze them first manually. So we have enough data that we can train artificial intelligence through a deep learning methodology to be able to identify sounds automatically. Then once we have this, the next phase will be, hopefully starting next year, will be to develop a system that can be deployed autonomously in the city 24/7 that can identify some sound, and I say identify, not record. So it will just listen to the sound, identify if you recognize anything, and then keep the metadata, but not the sound. So we don't record sound, which is a big problem, of course, for that would be a big problem in terms of privacy when we record voices and so on. So we developed this workflow. We start to deploy recorders that could record about 10 days to 2 weeks non-stop of recordings. And so we did a first batch initially with 11 points in different places in the city. So we record more than 1,700 hours of recording with about 6 days in average for each point, non-stop. And then we start to classify them. So we identify a total of 150 sound noise that we could identify manually. And then when we use students to listen to those amazing sound of the city and to tag the beginning and the start of each sound. So we identify so far about 33,000 labels. So when we say strong labels, it's the name of the sound plus the start and end, so we can really know where it is in the audio file. So, and then since then we have more, so quickly some data from our data set. Total for now, we have about 140 days of recording. We have about 12% that we label. And so in this 12, so we are not focusing on labeling everything. The idea is to have enough labels, so about 1,000 to 10,000 in each class of sound, so we can properly train the artificial intelligence that can identify those sounds. So we still have some work to do on that, but we started. So if we look at the taxonomy, we basically, if we look at the 4 major class of sound, we have mechanical, music, nature, and human. You see that mechanical, that's really predominant. So it's about construction, ventilation, non-motorized transport, motorized transport, social signals, so that can be like a traffic light or whatever. So it's a very predominant sound. I have to say that most of the recording that we labels been done during pandemic. So now we're doing also a batch after pandemic. That's because Macau, we've been really locked for 3 years. So we will also try to study the difference in between those two, but we haven't done that part. In terms of so classes, so obviously motorbike and cars are by far the highest number. Also, I mean, we analyze more recording in the city than in the nature, but it's also the representation of the space is also more city space than urban space than green space, obviously. So now I was just trying to, we went through the recording we have, and we were trying to see, okay, how about the soundscape that is really linked to the Portuguese heritage, particularly, so that have been recorded in Macau, and we could really, there's not much we can associate with Portuguese heritage in terms of soundscape in Macau, but there's still some clearly identified elements. So the folk dance, the traditional folk. So you probably know more than me actually about Portuguese traditional folk dance. So this is very popular still in Macau. So most of those dancers, they're actually Chinese, some Macanese, but the majority are Chinese. They actually like it. Of course, it's encouraged by the government to create festival about it for tourism purpose. So that's also a different aspect. And then there's the second aspect is the patois. So it's the dialect in Macau, which is really, really interesting. Again, I'm no expert on that, but it's a mix of Portuguese, Cantonese, but also all the colony along the way, the former Portuguese colonies. So there's sound from Malay, there's sound from Indian specific language and so on. So there's really a mix of things. And that's something that the Macanese are very proud of, and they try to keep alive. So it was very, very in danger to disappear, but now it's coming along. So every year they have a theater. So they have songs, they record video, they try really to encourage younger generation also to speak a little bit about it, but it's still very limited. So a big part of it is based on Portuguese, obviously, but there's really a mix of it. The right one.
Tem mais chiste, sang nunca.
Paskia, não tem chiste. Iloto choma, 12 papiasang.
Sang.
Eu falo sang, amago papiasang. Iloto ni sabe papia batua. Mas que atrevido, sang nunca.
Ai,
Sorte que a Pim te oferece bilhete para eu. Se nunca, sang, atira sa pega na sang.
Those ones start.
Both of it.
Yeah. Don't ask me, but it's based on the original Portuguese song that they translate in patois. So I have the reference in my note, but I don't know the translation of it. So it's a very interesting community that start to really come up in the scene in theater, particularly in Macau. And then we have more traditional sounds. So obviously, as I mentioned, the is here. So churches are something very common, not only the bells, but the songs in the church when there's a Portuguese festival or a Catholic festival. So they have still procession in the city with a very traditional songs and so on. So we can really see it. And this is also very much supported by the government as a tourist attraction as well. And then there's other type of sound that we really can trace along the way. So we were through like those typical Portuguese pavement that we have all over the city that are, most of them are created by Chinese nowadays. They were not here during the Portuguese time. So they are just created to decorate the city and make it more aligned with the tradition. But the interesting part is that when you walk along those ways, the sound is very different from the standard pavement, basically. So this is actually typical of a soundscape due to the Portuguese heritage. So for us, really looking at the sound only in that case, this is really part of it. And then we were wondering about all the sirens that we hear in the city, like we hear in any city around the world. So ambulance, police, and so on. And then we were just wondering and never pay attention to that. And we find out that actually most of them are the same as in Portugal, and they're totally different from China. So they're actually those sounds also as I'm not going to play this sound because they are not very present. Actually, no, I didn't put the sound anyway. But this is so these are really also coming from a traditional Portuguese. So we are working on this website that is going to be online by the end of the month. So where we will gather all the result of our research. So a couple of publications, and then a complete database of all the sounds that have been identified. They can be searched, classified, searched by tag, by category, by anything you want. And everything will be obviously open, and also the whole database can be downloaded like this. So we have a first database that's going to be mainly about the classification we've done, and then all the technical information about the sound, so the sound pressure level and all this kind of information. But actually coming along and listening to what I heard so far here today, I'm probably interested also to be able to see how we can integrate a more heritage perspective on the database to identify some of the elements in a different perspective or in more historical perspective. So that's for the website. So then finally, we also work on more awareness programs. And we have one of them is what we call the Soundscape Creative Workshop. So basically what we did is we went to Bangkok twice so far in the King Mongkut University of Technology in Bangkok. And then where they have a media and arts program. And then we took students, they listened a couple of sounds that we selected from Macau. We don't tell them anything. So it's very linked with what Kevin mentioned a little bit with students, but it's not music in that case, it's really sounds. And so they just listen, and the idea is that they be able to create an artwork just based on that sound. So we did first element in May last year. And now we are in the process to select the final piece of artwork. So they did, of course, just a rough draft during the workshop, but it was a half day workshop. And then they continued during their class with the professor over there to finalize the artwork. And we are going to do a online exhibition with their work. So the perspective of sound from Macau in a completely different culture, and that's where we are interested to see the result of this. So these are preliminary work that they did. The exhibition will be totally different from that. So there will be drawings, there will be animation and short movies from different type of classes that we did. We also had yes. So this is a video that we created with a sound that are generated, so the whole soundtrack is based on sound from Macau. This, I'm not going to play it, it's about 2 minutes, but it's a video that is AI generated. So basically we use Midjourney to create images, and then we create like a sound walk or a trip in Macau, just based on those image generated. And then we present that in South Korea last November in a media exhibition. We also have another exhibition coming next week. I'll be in Vietnam to present an installation art where people will be able also to have a visual that is not the main focus. The main focus is the sound from Macau, and then it's a trip into Macau. So we are going to run also this over there. So all based on those sounds. And then finally, so the music instrument that was created in 2012 by my colleague, Professor Alvaro Barbosa. So it's an instrument that he created when he was in postdoc in Stanford. And we 2 years ago, we started to work on a new version, an improved version where we give it an acoustic chamber, a new design, and then we open source everything. So anyone that has access to a digital fabrication lab can actually recreate this instrument and customize it to make it really in different versions. So we did different size, different design, and it's really easy to do. And then we will also have this instrument in Vietnam next week to have a concert with video and also sound from the Soundscape of Macau, so all together. So that's also the kind of work we are doing. So next, I'll finish here. So we are hopefully getting a second fund next year to continue this and develop a technology that will allow us to record permanently in the city or identify sound and be able to have an evolution of sound over time. So we can hopefully give tools to the public in general, but also to policymakers to understand the soundscape of Macau. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'm happy to present Pedro Aragão, who teaches at Unirio and Rio de Janeiro. For the last 4 years, Pedro has been in Aveiro, at the University of Aveiro, at the Institute of Ethnomusicology, working on a project of sound archives across the Lusophone world, Brazil and Portugal, working with archives of 78 RPM discs.
Oh, wow.
And today he's going to talk to us about sound archives across the Lusophone world, particularly about the Libersound project that also he was working on during his fellowship for 4 years at the University of Aveiro. Good evening. Welcome, Pedro Aragão.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Professor David for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. So it is a paper about this ongoing research project that I developed in partnership with my colleague here, Susana Sardo, and it's called Libersound, Innovative Archival Practice Towards Sound Memory Liberation, Recorded Musical, Transcontinental Experience Connected Communities. Financed by Fundação para Ciência e Tecnologia from Portugal, and developed by Instituto de Ethnomusicology, Centro de Estudos em Música e Dança, and University of Aveiro in Portugal. Libersound project proposes the liberation of musical inheritance contained in obsolete media. We are talking specifically about these 78 RPM shellac discs, which served as a primary medium for the commercialization of music throughout the entire first half of the 20th century. The project is focused on examples of popular music micro-expressions recorded and disseminated by recording industry in Portugal, Mozambique, Brazil, and Goa in India, territories that share political histories and common language with evident echoes on musical transits and experiences. The research seeks to understand the complex transnational process of flows and appropriations of musical practice in early Lusophone phonographic recordings. This study also aims to address the following questions. What was the role of the phonographic industry in the construction of a musical imaginary in countries and territories such as Portugal, Brazil, Mozambique, and Goa? What was their role in the construction of different musical identities in these contexts? How music has been used by phonographic industries to construct, evoke, or emphasize social-cultural alterity? And in which way recording industries reinforced cultural domination using racial and gender-oriented stereotypes through music? So, in order to address these questions, Libersound projects comprises a transcontinental research team joining researchers, ethnomusicologists, sound engineers, designers, and sound archive curators from different countries. In Brazil, Libersound projects works in association with Instituto Moreira, a private institution that owns the most important sound archive in the country. This institution is also responsible for the creation of Discografia Brasileira em 78 Rotações, a digital repository with around 44,000 recordings available for streaming listening. In Mozambique, the research is focused on the historical Radio Mozambique collection located in the country's capital, Maputo. Created in 1932, Radio Mozambique became the most significant Oriental African radio during the 40s, with an important role in the Portuguese colonial politics. Its sound collection comprises around 22,000 shellac discs, including Portuguese music and historical local musical practice. In Portugal, 22, sorry, it's wrong there, yeah. In Portugal, the research is focused on José Moça's collection, donated to University of Aveiro in 2012. Recognized as the largest, most significant disc collection in Portugal, it consists of around 18,000 phonograms recorded between 1900 and 1950, covering a wide range of musical genres from Fado to classical music. And finally, in Goa, in India, Libersound project is focused on the historical sound collection of All India Radio, created in 1946 as Emissora de Goa. Their sound archive stores a collection of 400 shellac discs that include instrumental music and songs in Portuguese and Konkani, recorded between 1946 and 1967. In this specific paper, I'm going to focus on one of the main concerns of Libersound project that is linked to colonial and decolonial approaches concerning these sound collections. And of course, I will focus on Brazilian context. Academic research on early commercial recording is historically recent in countries like Brazil, and it's mainly focused on historical aspects, in addition to concerns with digitization and preservation issues. As we are going to see, Brazil was the first country in Latin America to develop a solid phonograph industry at the beginning of the 20th century. Casa Edison, the first recording label in the country, was created in 1901, and from 1902 to 1964, around 64,000 phonograms were recorded in Brazil. However, more than reviewing these historical aspects, I intend to discuss how can we relate concepts such as colonialism and decoloniality with sound collections. How can a sound collection be studied from the colonial perspective? What do the sounds stored in those collections have to tell us about history of racial and political oppression in Brazil? And that leads us to the next point that I call here Sound Archives, Ethnicity and Racialization, studying the sonic color line in Brazilian early commercial recordings. So, according to the English historian Robin Blackburn, about 12 million people from various regions of Africa were enslaved and brought to the Americas between 1500 and 1870. Of this total number, around 1.5 million died during the Atlantic crossing. For Brazilian historians Lili Schwartz and Eloise Starling, around 4.9 million enslaved Africans were brought to Brazil throughout the entire period of the slave trades. Despite the crucial importance of Afro-musical heritage for Brazilian society, field recordings dedicated to Afro-Brazilian musical practices only took place in the early 1930s, albeit in a very sporadic and anomalous way. The folkloric expeditions conducted by Brazilian musicologist Mário de Andrade in 1935 and Luiz Heitor de Correia de Azevedo in the 40s are the only examples of field recordings made in Brazil in the first half of the 20th century. By contrast, Brazil has developed a solid phonographic industry since the beginning of this 20th century. As previously mentioned, the first recording label in Latin America was created in 1901, followed by the first industrial factory dedicated to production of shellac discs in 1913. As I said, from 1902 to 1964, around 4,000 phonograms were produced in Brazil. This large musical production was mainly focused on popular urban musical styles, with a strong presence of Afro-Brazilian musical practices such as lundus, machiches, and sambas. The contrast between the relatively small number of field recordings, on the one hand, and the significant number of commercial recordings made by Black artists and groups on the other, leads us to a series of questions. What was the role of the phonograph industry in the construction of racial soundscapes in Brazil? In what ways did phonograph industries contribute to the establishment of racial boundaries in Brazilian society? Recent studies in anthropology, ethnomusicology, and popular music studies have been stressing the set of strategies that phonograph industries worldwide use to create racial representation using sounds. Aligned with recent studies in anthropology that understand sounds issue as essential for the comprehension of power relation between different social classes, American anthropologist Jennifer Sober proposes the concept of sonic color line to designate a set of sound strategies that enables listeners to construct and discern racial identities based on voice and sounds. So I quote, "The sonic color line produces codes and politicizes racial difference through the ear, enabling us to hear race as well as see it. It's a socially constructed boundary that racially codes sonic phenomena such as vocal timbre, accents, and musical tones." End of quotation. Historically marked by a slave system that lasted for almost 4 centuries, the musical practice of African diaspora in Brazil were systematically ignored, silenced, and repressed, as were the voices of their representatives. Such structural racism can be observed in the ways that Black populations were usually depicted in newspapers and magazines from this period. Here I can show you a cartoon that was published in a Brazilian magazine in 1908, a Brazilian magazine called O Malho. It's a caricature of a choro, a music and dance practice that was mainly associated with Black population from the suburbs of Rio de Janeiro. The cartoon highlights the primitive and comic aspects that were commonly associated with the African-American universe in Brazil. These racial caricatures were also present in the context of the music industry. There are many examples of the construction of a sonic color line in Brazilian shellac discs. I'd like to focus on one specific recording that's called Baile de Pretos, that was recorded in 1907 by a singer called César Nunes, a white singer and actor that had great prestige in Brazil during this period. Baile de Pretos reveals how Afro-Brazilian populations were represented in a sonic realm. Here we can listen to interjections that intend to refer to the primitive and rural universe, imitations of language and vocalities of enslaved Africans, all in a register of frank comicality. So let's listen.
O capim da porta do rio, o capim da porta do rio ficou pasmado de ver um navio titio. Essa gente escangalha tudo. Terezinha do anjo que eu vai morrer, menina.
So, if it's clear that white agents normally linked to the entertainment industry, such as the singer César Nunes, were actively working to create racial stereotypes using recording music, it's also important to recognize the role of Black musicians that were fighting to promote Afro-Brazilian musical practices positively at the beginning of the 20th century. I now want to focus on the recording made by Black flute player Pedro Galdino and his Conjunto Africano. Pedro Galdino is probably this guy, we don't know for sure, and this is a picture of his group that was called Africanos de Vila Isabel. He was very popular in Rio de Janeiro before Pixinguinha, that became the most popular choro musician. In contrast with the cartoon we have just seen, here we can see real Black musicians in a picture from a photograph from 1910. Pedro Galdino and his Conjunto Africano were one of the first Black musicians to record at Casa Edson, the first Brazilian label, in 1912. As well as being musicians, they worked as laborers in a textile factory in Rio de Janeiro. There is very little biographical information about Pedro Galdino and his ensemble. We do not know the names of the musicians who were part of the Conjunto Africano, nor their dates of birth and death. Scattered reports in newspapers of the time allows us to infer that the group had great popularity in the proletarian neighborhoods of the city, probably performing at private parties linked to choro tradition. They recorded 24 phonograms in 1912 with compositions by Pedro Galdino. However, Pedro Galdino had never had any of his compositions published during his lifetime. And the only records that exist of his music are these shellac discs and some manuscript scores that survived from choro musicians' archives of the beginning of the 20th century. So just to conclude, although this brief case study cannot be considered conclusive given the complexity of
Claudina, choro pelo pessoal do bloco para a Casa Paulada, Rio de Janeiro.
music that's called Flauzina. It's a polka. He named it as a polka, but it's quite different from a European polka, certainly. And it's still very popular in the roda de choro in Rio de Janeiro. You can listen to this music nowadays. Okay. So conclusions. Although this brief case study cannot be considered conclusive, given the complexity of the topic addressed, I believe I can enumerate some assertions that point to future research developments. Firstly, I try to highlight the importance of early commercial recordings to the study of the dynamics of Afro-American musical practices in Brazil. Since field recordings in the musicological field only began in Brazil in the 1930s, commercial recording are the only existing references that we have nowadays concerning Afro-diasporical musical heritage at the very beginning of the 20th century. In countries like Brazil, where phonograph industries had a strong actuation, sound archives focused on early commercial recordings can be a relevant tool to the study of topics such as music and migration, music and colonial issues, music and racialization, amongst others. It's clear that we have to be aware of the problems and cautions when dealing with these commercial recordings in academic studies, and that assertion leads us to the second point I would like to stress. It's undeniable that the phonograph industries have played an important role in the dissemination of racial prejudice, reinforcing domination processes using racial stereotypes through music. Phonograms like Baile de Pretos that we listen here are examples of the construction of these racial stereotypes. Although such processes have been studied in the Brazilian context in the field of anthropology and history, few authors have been able to draw on any systematic research into the role of sound as a central element in the creation of this racial representation in social life. In this sense, the dialogue with concepts such as a sonic color line, as proposed by Jennifer Sober, may represent new directions for the colonial studies on Brazilian phonographic industries. At the same time, it's clear that the study of early commercial recordings in Brazil can reveal how Black musicians had an active role in the process of insertion and legitimization of Afro-American musical practices in Brazilian society. In this sense, commercial phonograms from the beginning of the century may constitute the only sources that we have to reconstruct, even partially, the trajectories of Black musicians in Brazil. In addition, a significant part of these phonograph discs can be recognized today as part of the Afro-American musical heritage. For instance, Pedro Galdino's records made for Casa Edson in Rio de Janeiro were recently incorporated into an ongoing process of recognizing choro music as part of Brazil's intangible heritage conducted by Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional. These recordings help to reconstruct underground memories of Brazilian Black workers' musical practices, whose life trajectories remain virtually unknown. In this sense, sound archives can be used not only as tools for the comprehension of racial segregation and colonial practices during the first half of the 20th century. They can also be used to reposition and recover the voices of those who were silenced and repressed in third world countries that inherited the traditions of 19th century imperial colonialism. Thank you.
Given the time, I want to invite you to ask your questions directly to the panelists during our reception. And I'm very thankful for some fascinating presentations. Let's give a round of applause. The concert starts at 6 o'clock in the auditorium just downstairs.